Hey, everyone. I am so excited to have you guys here with me today as I talk to Naomi Hattaway about leaving. Now, that's a really broad topic. So I am going to let her tell you what she's an expert at leaving. So, Naomi, take it away.
Sure. So, hello, everybody. As Rashida said, my name is Naomi Hattaway. And I guess it's kind of interesting because I would say that I'm an expert at leaving a lot of things, one of which being countries that I've lived in, places that I've lived in. And really, what I do for work is helping people leave their jobs and their workplaces. And then the other piece of that is then also helping organizations do better when it comes to being proactive about the reality that people leave. So, yeah, we could talk leaving in all sorts of different tentacles and tenets.
Okay. Now, if you guys are familiar with my channel, like my way, if I talk to you about leaving your job, I'm just going to say, just don't show up. Just mail that laptop back. Like, girl, they will figure it out. Just stop doing work until, they shut off your computer. But Naomi has better ideas. And I love bringing people to you guys that have better ideas. So, hey, if you're watching live now, hi, it's a special time. It's in the evening because I am in Australia. And yeah, that's all. Hey to everyone watching live. Hey to everyone watching on the replay. If you're watching the replay, let me know in the comments. But I'm going to send this back over to Naomi because I want to get right into this. Now, how did leaving workplaces become an area that you started paying attention to?
Yeah. So, it actually started when we were living overseas. So we lived in New Delhi, India for 3 years, and then we lived in Singapore for 1 year. And I got really familiar with the concept of leaving well from that place in my life. So there's a common concept around leaving well for folks that are missionaries, folks that are expats, folks that are nomadic, folks that are living outside their passport country. And the idea is that you have to leave a place well to be able to start in the new place well. So that might look like saying goodbye, controlling the way that your goodbye party looks like, seeing your favorite spots one more time before you leave. And when I repatriated to the States after living overseas for 4 years, I got really involved in the nonprofit sector. I couldn't work while we were in India and Singapore. And so I'd done a ton of volunteering, but I hadn't been able to work. So we land back in the States, I go right into nonprofit, which might not have been the best thing. But over several different jobs, I realized the workplace can be really, really toxic. And so I left a position and a job and a role. And I say that I left it loudly, and I kind of borrowed the tenets from leaving well from a location base and applied it to the workplace. And when I left, I said why. That might not be advisable for everybody. It might not be necessary. It might be too much energy for everybody. But I said why I was leaving. And the main reason I left was because I was no longer aligned. My values didn't align with the nonprofit. And after I left, I kept having people call me and ask how I did it, why I did it, if I could help them. That was about 3 years ago. And so it's just kind of blossomed into the work that I do now. I have done a lot of work, a lot of research, and working with a lot of clients to understand even the archetypes of people leaving. So I have a really good quiz. There's 4 different types of leavers. So I don't know if that answers kind of the generic question that you're asking, but I'll stop there for just a minute.
It does. And I got this from your website yesterday. And because leaving well is not a concept that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah.
So I wanted to dig into it deeper. And leaving well is kind of what you like, what all of your work revolves around. So before I had this conversation, I wanted some background. And on your website, it says leaving well is the art and practice of moving on from a place, thing, role, or job with intention, purpose, and when possible, joy. And that last part of joy is something that is so disconnected from the way we as a society leave things, right?
Yeah.
It's so rare that it's a joyful departure on either end, right?
Right.
For you as a person who's leaving, for the person, organization, thing being left, there's rarely any joy. And so it's really exciting to talk to someone who's how can we make this a better experience?
Yeah.
So for anyone thinking of quitting your job, I brought Naomi here so that you can do better than just not showing up anymore, which is exactly what my therapist told me to do.
Well, and I will say, Rashida, like there are definitely circumstances and situations where that would also be my counsel. Like, I don't think you always have to have this like beautifully laid out plan. Sometimes it is best for your health and your wellness to just bounce. So
Okay.
there's that.
Okay. So
There's also, let me just say, there's also the caveat that sometimes it's not our choice, the leaving. And so I also want to be just really careful to say, like, it's hard to make a joyful situation out of being fired. So I want to give that caveat. If you're listening, you're watching, and you're like, yeah, there was nothing joyful about that. I totally get it. And I think that that then becomes the joy piece can then come in afterwards when you're grieving and healing, which also isn't something that we normalize, that needs to take place when we leave a workplace.
Okay. All right. I love okay, so for those of you that don't know Naomi, I met her online. It feels, was it 6 months ago? I feel like it was 6 months.
Yes, it was
Yes.
December.
Yes. And she is one of the most generous people I see online. Like every platform I see her on, she's very like kind and giving and thoughtful. And so we're going to take advantage of her kindness and generosity. So if you have questions about leaving that you can answer in a way that will anything that will not get you in trouble for asking the question here publicly, drop in the comments. But Naomi, I want to talk to you a bit about how, if you're in, for the women who are in a situation where they are thinking of leaving work sometime in the next 12 months, what are some things they should be thinking about now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's the biggest piece of it is like everyone's also going to be on a different timeline. And so my answers are going to be different if it's in 2 weeks, if it's tomorrow versus if it's a year or 6 months. I think if you are listening, watching, and you have like 12 months, you know it's time to leave, but you've got a longer runway. I think the things that I always recommend to my clients and what I would recommend here, first go back to your job description and or project description, whatever scope, whatever it is that you are currently working under, and identify the things that you were originally really excited about, but you haven't had time to get finished. Or what were the things that have come up that you have really been wanting to be a part of, and you haven't had either the guts, the courage, or someone hasn't listened to you to get involved in those projects. 12 months, even 6 months is a really good amount of time to finish some of those projects that you want to be in. Or jump back into your job description and get some of the things done that are really important to the role, but that you haven't had time to finish. The other thing, and this sounds really obvious or simple, a lot of people, when they're thinking about leaving their job, they get panicky and they go and like clean out their email inbox. I don't know, maybe we all just think that someone's going to find us out or see an email that we said something nasty in or whatever. I actually encourage women to go through their drafts in their inbox, because that usually represents things that they haven't had the guts to say yes to or to push send on. And sometimes if you know you're leaving, you might find some gold in your drafts or in your draft documents that you've been creating. The other thing that I think that's really important if you have a long runway is revisit your network. Like go back to the people that you have either met inside the workplace or at conferences or what have you. And you don't have to tell them necessarily that you're leaving, but you can open up their, like, ask them, like, what projects do you have going on? What are you working on that's exciting? Where do you see gaps in your workplace? And then that can start connecting dots for what you might want to do if you're going to go from one workplace to another workplace. If it's a retirement, then that's a different story. But I think it's just all about being really strategic about how you use the people that you know, the projects that you want to work on, and then your skill set's what you're really good at.
Okay. Yeah, these are things I would never consider at all. Teresa says this topic is right on time and she's taking notes. Teresa, cheering you on, girl.
You can do it, Teresa.
You can do it. All right. So what are the ways that you see organizations not handling the leaving well? And what are some things that we can think about in order to maybe help our departure be smoother?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think the biggest thing in the thank you for saying earlier that I'm kind and generous. I'm working on being kind and generous, which is my nature, and also being a truth teller, which sometimes has a weird intersection. And so one of the things I'm really working on is saying out loud and publicly that organizations have to start acknowledging that people leave. Like, it's literally a reality. And every time an organization acts as though they're shocked when someone leaves, it's like, well, that's the nature of everything in life. I think the one thing that I see is HR departments treating it as though the person leaving is a risk to be mitigated. And so if you think about exit interviews, they might seem nice and fluffy, and they might seem like they care about you as they do an exit interview. And I'm here to tell you that exit interviews are primarily for the organization to make sure that there's not anything that they don't yet know about that will come out after the person leaves. It's literally a thing to hedge their own risk. And so organizations, to counteract an exit interview is the only thing that they do. I really recommend stay interviews. That's another thing that the individual employee can ask for. It's something that managers can implement. And the basic idea of a stay interview is that you, on a regular basis, have your employees meet with you to talk about what's going well, what's not going well. Almost ask the question, what would make you stay in this role? What would keep you happy in this role? Is there something else that you'd like to do? Really gutsy managers, if anyone's listening and is a people leader, you can also review resumes and job descriptions with your people during stay interviews. The thing that people always freak out about is like, well, I think that would make people leave if we're going to have those kind of conversations. And it doesn't. It actually helps really, I think, almost embolden culture a little bit to be able to say, like, what are we missing on your resume that either you haven't added in the time that you've been here with us, or what do I not know that you're good at because it's been 9 months since I've talked to you as a manager? That all of that stuff can be helpful. I think the other thing that organizations can do to not make it suck so much is just name that it's hard and that it's messy. Leaving tends to be swept under the rug. A lot of times people who stay behind don't even know about people leaving until they're already out the door. And there's just no reason for that. So then that kind of goes back to working with individuals. I don't like to put all of that responsibility onto individuals, but there are some things that individuals can do if you're the one leaving. So I'll stop there.
Okay. So I love the concept of a stay interview. And one feature said something similar. No employers did anything like that for me, though. And I think it's really, so I'm so when you say this, I'm feeling some things internally.
Yes.
Because
let's talk
I
about
have never had a manager who I could suggest a stay interview to,
Yeah.
who wouldn't like
freak out about it.
Freak out immediately. Not just freak out at the concept of like, oh, she's thinking about leaving, but like attempting to implement something that isn't part of the corporate skeleton, right?
Yes.
I think I can think of one specific manager who would be like, what is this? We won't be doing this. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, and so some of those things, you're right. And there's probably more managers that wouldn't be okay with that than there are that would be. But I think it's going to take, like, we're going to have to exercise the muscle, because what we're doing now in the workplace isn't working. Like, it's not healthy for any of us. And so I think one by one, or the women that feel safe enough with their managers, if you can do it and then have it documented in your work file, you know, that I brought this meeting. And it also doesn't have to be, I'm just trying to think, like, as we're talking, it could almost be something like, in that meeting 2 weeks ago during the all hands or the stand up or the whatever, I heard so-and-so say that they couldn't finish this project on time because they had these issues. One of those issues is something I happen to have a skill set in. Would it be okay if I joined their team for a sprint over the next 2 weeks to just help them get it over the line? That can also take the shape of a stay interview. It doesn't have to be formal where you're sitting down and like, I'm leaving if you don't let me do these projects. It can also just be thinking to yourself, if you know you want to go and it's about 12 months, what can you do, or what can you spot that you could have impact in your organization before you go? There's also the reality, you might not give a shit about having impact before you go. So there's that too.
I was actually going to talk about that, because when I think about the ways that I've left jobs, for most of them, because, you know, I'm a Taurus, I'm a stick around, right? I'm a stand by him. Woo, until like it's reached the
until it's
level
done.
of until like, oh, is that my foot? One foot? Am I like 1 foot in the grave? Okay, like let's back out slowly. This is crazy.
Yeah.
What are we doing? And so for the women who can't leave now for any whatever reason,
Yep.
their runway is 6 to 12 months, we'll say, but need to take care of themselves,
Yeah.
right? And maybe need to document some things for themselves.
Yep.
What are some strategies you can think of for them, like keeping sane for a little
Yeah.
while?
Yeah. I think that goes back to your network. And I think we underestimate the people that we know.
Mhm.
It can be really, well, I think anyway, I don't want to put this on anyone who's watching, but I think it can be really, really a form of self-care to reach out to people maybe once a week, to ask, again, going back to asking what projects they're working on, what are they hearing on the streets in terms of like what cool things are coming up next. You don't have to say that you're in the market to be looking, but you could say that you're just curious and you want to know what they're up to. That can open up more doors and can also help you just establish some solidarity, because the more of us that talk to each other about the stuff that sucks at work, the more it helps us understand we're not alone, first of all. And then the second piece of that is that often it ends up giving us opportunities to understand what else is out there. The other thing that I'll say is if you are in a position where either the job terminates and you don't have a lot of runway or any at all, or you make the decision to go, you're 1 foot out the door, and one day you wake up and you're just done. The one thing I would say is that you can take care of yourself by, this again sounds a little obvious, door dashing yourself some groceries or Instacarting yourself some groceries. I think the most important thing that I hear most women say is that they wish they had said goodbye to certain folks that they worked with. And that might sound a little woo or a little soft, but that's the most common thing. If I work with someone after they've left, they're like, I wish I would have said goodbye. So maybe one of the things you want to do some like self-care for yourself is download your contacts. Make sure that you have all of those from your work email, because once that email is turned off, you won't have it. And most companies don't let you write your own out of office. So downloading contacts is a real practical form of
That's
self-care.
that's smart. I know at one of my jobs, my boss was like, "Don't tell anyone you're leaving." And it's like, I'm just not going to be there one
I
day.
know.
I'm just
I
not going to be.
know. And that happens so often. Okay, did you watch Reading Rainbow when you
Yes.
were younger?
Yes.
Okay, so I just watched Butterfly in the Sky,
Okay.
and which is the Netflix documentary. And they were talking, the producers and the directors were all talking about how they lost their funding. And so one day they were recording episodes and the next day they weren't. And the two directors it was a husband and wife. And at the end of the documentary, them and the writer are both talking about how they had so much grief and loss and they didn't realize it. And decades later, they're still processing the fact that they didn't get to say goodbye to the people that they were creating with. And even if your job sucks, you still probably have some solid relationships. And grief and loss is a huge part of it that we don't talk about. We're all supposed to just live under capitalism and think that work is just this thing we do. But there's real relationships that happen inside the workplace.
What What are the impacts you see from us not processing grief and loss from the workplace?
Oh
Like in the women
gosh.
that you work with?
Um, it's similar to when we leave a spot that we live or a home, and it's unresolved grief and it's unresolved loss, and it's um, sometimes it's trauma, especially women in the workplace. Depending on your situation, there's a lot of toxicity and trauma, and not dealing with those things. Um, you can't outrun them. You take them with you to the next job, or you take them with you to the next relationship. So often, a lot of times, the women that I work with, we end up at a point where I'm like, you really probably need to talk to a therapist, because stuff ends up coming up. I'm not a therapist, and stuff comes up that needs to be resolved. Grief is not linear. And so oftentimes something will come up in one of our sessions and it's actually from 4 jobs ago. That is just kind of traipsed with them. It's like leaving a place, the problems fly with you. They don't stay in the place that you've left. So I think the biggest thing that I see also is a feeling of quitting too soon. That comes up a lot. And I guess to that, I would say that that goes back to our own values and realizing why we were in the workplace, that specific work to begin with. And you can do some, there's some, actually I have a podcast interview that's coming up talking about some questions to ask yourself around, is your work finished? If it's not finished, how can you resolve that for your own self? Because that's also not something that you want to carry around, the weight of that.
And neither one of us thought about linking to your podcast because we're good at a lot of things, but not everything. So I'm going to drop a link right now.
All at the same time.
Can't do everything all the time. No.
Well, in season 1 of the podcast,
Leaving Well.
Yes, and season 1 of the podcast is interviews with guests who have left a thing. Some of them are public stage kind of things where everyone knows their name. Other ones are people who aren't in the public eye. What I've heard from people who have listened to those episodes is it was helpful to understand all the feelings that go into leaving. And even if you're like, peace out, I'm gone, there's still feelings there. Like, even if you feel like you're in control of the moment, there's still going to be stuff that comes up. I work with a lot of women who are business owners who leave and need to shut something down. A lot of women who are founders of something, a nonprofit, a business, what have you. Those are hard too.
Okay. You said something a minute ago that I wanted to double back on, but I did not take notes because that is my downfall as an interviewer. And now I don't know what it was. It was about trauma, leaving. I'll get back there. I will get back there. If you know this is your last 2 weeks, what would you recommend that my audience is mostly Black women?
Yep.
Right. So as in speaking to Black women, what would you recommend they try to do in their last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think the first thing, like I had said earlier, is download your contacts. Mm-hmm. You likely, especially as a Black woman, have given more to your workplace, more to your job than has been documented, compensated, acknowledged, all those things. And there will be people who you interacted with at your job who are going to want to know where you are later. And so download your contacts. That's definitely something to do. I think I would also take a moment to literally document anything that needs to be written down, whether that is good, bad, or ugly, whether it's stuff that's happened to you, whether it's things that you've witnessed, even if it's things that you see that are gaps. Now, if you're asked for an exit interview, now anyone who's watching or listening who's in HR is going to be like shaking their head at me, but you also don't have to say yes to an exit interview. If you're asked to do one, it's totally up to you if you give one. If you do give one, you also don't have to answer all of their questions. That's probably another really important thing to know. The other thing I would say in the last 2 weeks is schedule if you can. Now, this is a point of privilege. Not everyone can do this, but schedule time between your last day and your first day of whatever's next. We go right from one thing to the next way too often. And even if it's just a weekend of and maybe a day, quit on a Thursday. So at least you have a Friday plus a weekend. Because I think that's probably the most harmful thing, is going right from one to the other.
Okay. So Naomi, she's very thoughtful about what you need and how you can manage your life. Take at least a week off, at least. I'm gonna tell you, because I talk to women all the time who I have one specific client in mind that I remember, and she was so stressed, and she was like, I cannot work anymore. And she had just quit one job, but she was still in that last 2 week period, and had another one starting. She was leaving on a Friday and started on a Monday. But you're telling me you had a transition period, but you didn't build in any space for yourself. Yeah. And now you're telling me that you can't handle, you're burned out, right? So how do we manage that? And to your point, it does require resources, right? It's not something you can do. It's not something that's available for everybody. But I think a lot of us put the new job ahead of what we need.
Yes.
And so when the new job is how soon can you start? Because they've had to they have not had that position filled for 6 months. They'll be okay if they wait another week.
Yep, they
They're
should.
gonna tell you they're not, right? They're gonna say, "No, no, no, what's the earliest? We need you in here. No, 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 no." But, like, you also need to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you
a
put your oxygen mask on.
and there are some employment opportunities where you can say, "I'm happy to start on the date you need, but the first 2 weeks needs to be remote." Like, I'll do all of my learning, I'll do all of my onboarding remotely, and that's a creative way that you can build in some time. The other thing, we need to go to our people. We need to say, "I need help," which
Mhm,
we don't do very often and do very well.
mhm.
But that's a way, like, if the resources aren't all there and you feel like you need to get that second job going right away, reach out to your community, reach out to your people, reach out to your circle and say, can I get a meal train for like the next week? So at least, for example, food's not something that you're worrying about. Like, there's ways I think that we need to be more resourceful inside of our communities, so that we can support each other taking more. I mean, think about when you go on vacation, the first week is still like not really vacation. Right as you're ending your first week of vacation is when you start to like finally
Recharge.
release
Yeah.
and finally let down. And so if we're not giving ourselves, I mean, you said a week, I think, I mean, if you can pull it off, 2 weeks would be even better.
Yes. The more time, the better, right? If you
Yeah.
could do a month, do a month. Like,
Yeah.
listen, you know me, Imma tell y'all not to go to work. 'Cause but, like, the most amount of time you can build in, the better, but I feel like if it's less than a week, there's just no time to shut there's no time to grieve, there's no time to
There's,
process. And what I see in a lot of communities is that ending one job and immediately having another job to start is kind of a flex.
yeah.
And it's like, but that's gonna kill you, right?
Yep.
Like, that's it sounds good in theory, like, yes, I left a job and I already have a new job.
Yep.
Sounds amazing. But, like, a nap in between would sound amazing too,
Right.
right?
Right.
So,
And
how
so I think would a day, like, I think part of what would be helpful if you're listening and you're like in that phase of knowing that you want to quit, what would you do with the time? Like, spend some time reflecting on that. Like, what would you do if you had 2 weeks? Because that can also then help you think expansively and generously towards yourself
Mhm.
about how much you deserve that time. Like, maybe it's no alarm clocks. Maybe it's not having to get dressed if your workplace requires a certain kind of dress. Maybe it's that you wanted to go get an ice cream cone and sit in the park in the afternoon over the lunch hour, and you want to just do that. Like, what would you do if you had 2 weeks? Reflect on that and then look at that page and think like, "Oh, yeah, I do deserve some of that,
Mhm.
in my life."
Yeah, that's smart. Uh, Strong Gift from God asks a good question. How can folks prepare for unexpected exits such as mass layoffs?
Yeah, this is strong gifted from God. The strong gift from God. This is a really, it's a good question, and it's also a really hard one to answer. Um, I think that one of the things that I see, I don't often work with women who have been laid off, just because that I think for me is better to recommend to like a career coach, someone who can walk them through the best, like what's next. Um, my answer is probably going to feel better from the perspective of what could I do if you were impacted, strong gift from God, by a layoff. So, like, I know that when I see that there's layoffs, I need to reach out and not even ask, but just send some money on Venmo or Cash App or send a DoorDash gift card. Um, I know that the best thing I can do for someone who's been impacted by layoffs is to offer to review their resume, or offer to post their resume, or offer to share with my network that someone is incredibly talented and is available on the market. Um, I don't know that there's any way to really prepare for an unexpected exit. There's only so many times you can review your resume and make sure it's up to date. I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing. If you haven't reviewed your resume in 6 months, you should do that. Everyone should, I think. Um, yeah, I don't know that there's a really good answer to that. I'm just going to be honest. There's really no way to prepare besides, tucking some money away for savings, um, making sure that you've got access to a network, making sure that you're active on LinkedIn. I know some folks don't like LinkedIn, but it's a good place to network, especially after a layoff. I don't know. That's not really a good answer.
It's helpful though, because I think a lot of us start feeling complacent in the job. Like,
Mhm.
we don't I know a lot of women who are in a situation where they're in a job that they don't love, but for one reason or another, we're not actively looking for another job.
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
at least like they're paying me, right? Like, I know what the paycheck's going to be every 2 weeks, every week.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'll deal with it. And so you don't stay updated, right? You're not actively looking, you're not updating your resume. And so it's a good reminder that you want to be aware of what the job market is doing,
Yeah.
and you want to be aware of like what people are getting paid, because
Yeah.
that changes,
It does. And the other thing too about your resume, like if your resume, if you haven't updated it since the last time you took a job, you're missing out on your like having a strong presence of mind to be able to identify what you've been working on that needs to go on your resume versus when you're in crisis. When you're in crisis, I think it's really hard to be able to be like, yeah, I was amazing at that project and I did X, Y, and Z. I'm going to plop that on my resume. You're going to be down in the dumps. It's going to be a crisis response. And so I guess that's probably the biggest prep, is make sure your resume is updated with what you've been doing at your current job.
Okay. Thank you. Wendy Cooper says, I left a job and slept for 3 weeks. I didn't know I was so tired. Yes, we're all extremely tired.
Yes.
Running on fumes.
Yes. And
Um,
on fumes, and I think there's so much expectation that we put on ourselves and that the system puts on us that we don't even know we're so tired. And like when your eye twitches, you're like, why is my eye twitching? Or why do I have a low-grade headache that I've had for 3 weeks that I don't know why? It's because we're tired. So I'm with you, Wendy.
Yeah. And then Christine R says, I took 3 months off when I was wrongly terminated. The best thing ever. I did guided meditation classes, yoga, drank my water, got my mind together, and reconnected with my inner being.
Yeah.
It's not going to be time that's available for everybody, but I think it's available to more of us than we acknowledge. Yeah.
And I think there's all sorts of ways too that we can tap into, like the things that Christine was saying. Maybe it's not all of those things. Maybe it's that you, instead of getting up and, here's another thing. So when you are terminated, fired, or you leave a job because you have to, and it's very sudden, let yourself grieve and let yourself stay in bed. Like, do not try and be Superwoman and like do all the things. You don't have to clean your house the next day. You don't have to show up for anyone. What I will say is there is going to be a point in time when you want to maybe start getting back into the swing of a schedule. And that's a really beautiful time to then go network on purpose. Join a class. Like, you never know where you're going to meet someone who has a connection to your next thing that you're going to be amazing at or feel really refueled by. So evenings, go take a pottery class, go walk in the park. It's as simple. I know this sounds so silly, but taking your shoes off and standing in the grass, having feet, connecting with the land. There's more ways that it's accessible to get yourself back together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. We talked about mass layoffs and what you can do. What are some signs that your job is around for a good time, not a long time? What are some signs people, and this isn't going to be very, like it's going to be specific to everybody, but are there things that you've seen that happen repeatedly before either a layoff or someone losing their job or something like that you can point to?
So I'm not super connected to the tech industry. I mean, those are the ones that seem to have like the most common layoffs. But I can tell you that inside of a department, inside of an organization, I think you should watch out for anytime that there's less communication. If communication starts falling off and it feels off or strange, sometimes that can be an indication that things are shifting. If there are public talks of mergers and acquisitions are huge opportunities for folks to then lay off people, especially when a company's been purchased by someone else. And there's a lot of us that don't realize. We're all excited about mergers and acquisitions because it means the company's growing. Well, the new company who's buying might not need your role anymore, or they might be bringing their own team. I think that's another, it's kind of sad but true, like especially in social impact, in the social impact sector, nonprofits, when an executive director or CEO leaves, oftentimes the new leader coming in might be amazing and they might be bringing their own team. So I don't know that I have exactly a good number of things that I would say are signs, but anytime there's transition inside of an organization, that is always an opportunity where things can get shaken up with jobs. I think that the other thing that I would say, it's tough because, especially with most of your audience being Black women, we have to be extremely careful and cautious about how we appear in the workplace and how we advocate for ourselves in the workplace, because of the assumptions and expectations of how we are supposed to manage ourselves. And that makes it really, really challenging to go to, like you were saying earlier, Rashida, you couldn't just go to your manager and be like, hey, listen, here's the deal. Here's what I want. Here's what I need. That I think is an opportunity to take advantage of ERGs if you have one in an employee resource group in your organization. It's also an opportunity, I think, if you are feeling unsettled at work or things feel a little uneasy, I think there's also an opportunity to reach outside of your workplace and go to more of an industry-wide organization or association. If you're in, say, the tech world, there are women in tech groups that operate outside of organizations, and that can also be a place. They're not all going to be amazing, but that can be a place to find some refuge and some support, and better networking too if you end up losing your job or you need to leave.
Yeah, that's actually a really great idea. From a comment, strong gift from God. Thank you for a super sticker. But we had some really great comments from Christine. Said, my situation was a merger. I should have left when upper management started jumping ship. At my last job, we went through 3 CEOs in 18 months.
Yeah.
There were the signs were there. Now, okay, let me not slander anybody here. Some of them had to go, but whatever. Follow the money like small bonuses. Yeah, if things are changing.
What? Say that again, Rashida.
Follow the money like small bonuses. I'm saying if things start changing on the money front, thing. My last company decided they needed to sell everything, and the company that was buying wanted to interview me to do the work because no one does the work I do, right? So they were like, "Oh, you can do this. Come work for us." Externally, the way I saw them operating, I knew they weren't a fit for me in the work I did.
A values match.
It was not a values match. And then I spoke to the HR director once, and she told me that a woman I know in the organization had already interviewed and had been given a role there. And I'm like, why are you? And I was like, oh, I can't work for you.
Yeah.
I was on the phone. Now, this is someone who I have worked for, who's worked for me at like 3 different companies, or worked with me at least 3 different companies.
Yeah.
Or this would have been our 3rd company together. So like, I already know, like she texts me from her bed to, you know what I mean? Like we're at home on the couch texting each other. We're friends. I know she already interviewed, but the fact that the HR manager is telling me this made me so uncomfortable with the whole situation. And I think for me, it was a sign that, like, even though, because I've been laid off, I feel desperate for a job.
Yeah.
We still have to have some standards, right? Like,
well, and so I don't know if you have one, but like when we lived overseas, we had a go bag. We had like the thing that I knew to grab if something happened, if it was, a political incident, if it was earthquake, whatever. And in the go bag, if you're not familiar with it, it was like passports, some medical records, cash, those kind of things, marriage license, our kids' information. And there's something, I think, calming about having your own version of a go bag for the workplace. So that goes back to like, what can you do to prepare? And it's knowing that if your job is terminated and you didn't have you didn't have a chance to know about it, what are you taking with you? And so that's another thing I think that we can kind of flip the script. What can you take? I'm not talking the stapler. Like, you don't need to take the stapler.
Take the stapler.
Rashida says take the stapler. But like, is there professional development dollars that you haven't taken advantage of that you could, in those last, if you feel something's going on, is there a workshop that you haven't signed up for, a certification that the job offers that you can like take with you? Are there projects that you can get your, wiggle into and weasel into to have your name on whatever, the paper that's written, the project that gets put over the line? I think there's ways that we can also look out for ourselves in that way. And, it might be manipulative or it might just be strategic, but think of creative ways to like take also as you're leaving a job.
I got my eggs frozen.
See?
Because, listen, it's part of my benefits package, and I have not used it. I went to the doctor, and he said, "Why are you interested in doing this?" And I was like, "Because they'll pay for it." And he said, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay, like, let's go, because it's super expensive. They were going to pay for it all. Take the stapler, freeze your eggs. If they have good dental care, get your teeth done, right?
Yes.
Whatever it is, you typically earn that on like day 1 or day 90, like somewhere in there. You earned it a long time ago, and you just don't have the time or the energy to use it. It's time to start doing that.
And that goes to like PTO, mental wellness days, like whatever it is that's on your benefits list, take every last one of them. And that's regardless of if you're thinking of leaving or not. Like,
yes. Get your eggs frozen if some crazy tech company will, or any company will pay for it. Okay, so I'm going to say this, and Naomi, I know you understand. I did not realize how many, until I was in a position of being laid off. No. Until I was at that tech company from like the very beginning. I did not realize how many workplace benefits are solely there to help the job.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it was when I was thinking about getting my eggs frozen that I was like, oh, they don't want women to leave the workplace. And they don't want husbands to have to take maternity leave. They're having us they have all these young employees, and they give us these benefits because they don't want us out of the workplace until they want us out of their workplace, right? We had unlimited PTO, but what that meant was there was no number of days, and so you never felt the need to take them all at the end of the year.
Yep.
I had unlimited PTO. My boss, even when I had everything done, my boss would be like, "Haven't you taken enough vacation?" Unlimited.
Unlimited makes us feel like we're getting something amazing.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
No. So it's interesting that when you think about the workplace as a whole, most workplace, and you've spent a lot of time in nonprofit. I've spent a lot of time in other places. But a lot of the way it's built is it's built for the company, but the dressing put on it is made to look like it's for the employee. And so there are ways that we need to take care of ourselves, because the company won't save you. They will not take care of you. They will nothing.
I have seen a couple of companies, going back to when we were talking about mass layoffs, I've seen a couple of companies put together a directory of the people that have been impacted by the layoff, and they have put it out, and they have said, these people are amazing. For all the different reasons, we can't continue employing them. And that felt like the first time I've ever seen a company like take some initiative and some responsibility for not just leaving people high and dry. But you're right. I mean, short of a manager doing something on the side, or short of a team reaching out to support someone, the company, 5 o'clock on your last day, they've already got that out of office email, if they even do it. They're moving on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was listening to your podcast, and it's interesting hearing you talk about workplaces, because the way I hear you talk, the way you hold these conversations is in a way that doesn't stress me out. But if I'm talking to people about the work they do, especially friends, my anxiety kicks up, because this sounds terrible. and you're
Yeah.
not doing anything. And we're going to have this conversation tomorrow and
Yep.
next week. And
Yep.
it's very, very hard to kind of sit after leaving corporate.
Yes.
Very hard to kind of hear these same things over again because they're triggering my unresolved issues, right? And so there's a part of me that wonders, and I think I know the answer already, but wonders if the way you talk about things is because you're just a shining angel from the sky with like all the right words to say at all the right times, or because nonprofit life is significantly different. But I don't think it really is it?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
So
I
you're an
think
angel from the sky with all the right words.
I'm an
Thank you.
angel. No, so my name Naomi means pleasant spirit, and I think my
Okay.
mother must have like on purpose tried to like distill with my name like forecast that I would just be this way. But I think where I have realized like I have had my own experience of I won't go so far as to say trauma in the workplace. It was toxic behavior that I was able to see. I was able to be separate enough from the work to see it. And I just think that we all deserve better. And maybe we'll be on a perpetual chase of what better is. And it will be several iterations of shitty work in the meantime. But I know that we deserve better. I also know, without a shadow of a doubt, that there are organizations and companies and founders and startups who want to do better. And so I think that every time I have a conversation about it, I'm just hoping that one person listening has the decision-making power and the power to be able to make a small change. So I think I have a little bit of, when you hear me talk, it's a little bit of gentle nudging and stating it as though it's fact, to hope that someone will come along and be like, oh, I could do that. Yeah. No, I don't think, I think nonprofits are pretty shit places to work for too.
Yeah. And so okay, so knowing that the landscape is just like shit and shit, right? With some more shit in the middle. How do we leave well and maybe start better? Like end up in a place that is
Yeah.
that we're not going to want to run away from
Yeah.
in 6 months, 3
Yeah.
months.
Well, so I think part of it is reframing for ourselves what work is for us. So I've been able to realize that work for me is not staying at a company for very long. I mean, I don't work for companies anymore. I'm full-time consultant now, and I won't ever go back. But like my husband, he's 12 years older than I am, and he's definitely from the generation of like, he wants the watch at the end of his service to that company, you know? And I think that landscape is totally changing. So maybe part of the starting better is having a redefined expectation for ourselves of what our dedication to the work is.
Okay.
Is it for us? Is it because maybe they have the benefits of being able to freeze our eggs and we want to go work for that place long enough to be able to get that benefit? Is it that there's a geographic benefit of working for the company? You want to be able to live somewhere else, or you want to be able to travel. Is it the impact that's going to be had? Is it a startup that you really believe powerfully in, that you want to be a part of? Or is it that you need benefits for 6 to 9 months? I don't think we have to go into a new job having it be that it's going to be forever. So starting well, I think, is a really honest conversation with ourselves about what we need from the job. And that can reframe our relationship to it in big ways. And it sounds a little fluffy, but if you go into a new job saying, you know, I'm going to be here. Okay, I'll give you an example. There's an organization that I'm currently helping hire for the programs team. I've interviewed people who have literally said to me during the interview, and I'm like so celebrating this. They're like, I am not going to be the person that will help you implement the program, but I would be amazing at helping you for the next 12 months build the program, design it, put all the structure into place, and then I can help you find the person that's going to be amazing for the long haul to implement the program. I think that's amazing. And if more of us did that, and I don't know the corporate world as well, so it might be a little bit different, but starting well can be really powerful when we know what we need out of it. There's a book by Christy Coulter, who worked at Amazon for a long time. It's called The Exit Interview, her book. And in it, she talks about like realizing she had a light bulb one day of like, oh, I can learn a lot from this, from working at Amazon. They might treat me like shit in the meantime. So she ended up writing for herself what she wanted out of the job. So that was a long-winded answer of one way I think that we can start well. The second thing that I would say, Rashida, is 100% about our values. If you are watching this and you can't name, or it's fuzzy for you, like what your top 3 values are for you personally, I would recommend that you take some time to identify those before you go into a new job. That can help you understand your relationship to the work. It can help you understand how to navigate with your colleagues, and it can also help you realize when it's time to go. So those would be top 2 things I think I would say.
Okay, I grabbed the book, dropped it in the comments. I think so I love having this discussion because I don't think we talk about it enough. We're expected to just show up at work.
Yeah.
Love it. And if you
either love it or just get through it.
Love it or get through it.
Yeah.
And if you get let go, you failed, right? There's some sort of moral failing there. Yep. And then you have to get another job as soon as possible. And when we think about the way, like, you might not believe all of those things, but there's a very good chance your community does, right? There's a very good chance your community believes a lot, if not all of those things. And it's so toxic, right? And it's so hard to get out of the box. When I've been laid off twice. And both times, immediately people were like, what are you going to do next?
Yeah.
I literally haven't even, like, I've been laid off my last 2, like, they've given me 2 weeks, right? I'm in my last 2 weeks. One time I was laid off and I was leaving for vacation, like the next week, to go take a bar exam. And people were asking me, what am I have one of the hardest, it's a California bar, the hardest test of my life coming up.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks. Like, let me, right? Like, but the way that we're expected to know, not just the next step, but like the next best step, because when you tell people what you're thinking of, then they're going to come in with their thoughts about it too, right? And so it's like, how can we shore up the way we feel about work so that when other people come in with these expectations and ideas, we're still really confident that what we know is best for ourselves is truly best for ourselves. And so I think these conversations are really important. And listening to Naomi's podcast, Leaving Well, is a great place to start. I recommend it, even though, I don't want to hear anybody talk about work. But she's like a little angel with a halo with all the right words.
The other thing I would want to say too, Rashida, is we're talking about, like, if you talk about the whole span of work, there's also a lot of women, especially Black women, who are in caretaking roles, who need to take a break from work. Yeah. That also creates a whole nother conversation around how to answer the community or answer in a job interview or on your resume when you've had to take a step back to either caretake for yourself or a family member, a loved one, someone in the community. And I think that's another big piece that we all need to be just that much more sensitive to, around asking people, what are you doing next? And also being ready to support our sisters and our people in our circles when they're looking for jobs, when the caretakings come to an end. There's a lot of grief that comes from having to leave to caretake to then try and find the next thing. And then I don't know if we have time to talk about it tonight, probably don't. But menopause in the workplace is another huge grief loss thing that also shifts and shakes us in our relationship to work. So I don't know where we go from here.
So wait, now that you've said that, we have to talk about menopause in the workplace. So tell me all the things I don't. Okay, so I was in Fiji last week, and in the last 24 hours in Fiji, I cried 3 times, like tears running down my face 3 times. And I was like, it's not my period, so I must really be feeling the sadness. But I was like, oh, I think this is perimenopause. I think perimenopause caught me, and I am now experiencing the most random, like, I had a connection with you and now I'm leaving, so I must cry when I see your face kind of moments. But let's talk about menopause in the workplace for those of us who are going through it and those of us who are coming up to it soon.
Yeah.
How does that create loss?
So I'm not an expert in this field.
Mhm.
There are lots of people who are amazing with menopause. Bernie Scott is one of them that I would recommend. There's all sorts of things that we can share later. But I've gone through menopause. I was an early menopause person. I'm 48
Mhm.
now, and I've been done with menopause since 2019. So I've been out of it for 5 years. So super
Wonderful.
early, and not medically. We don't know why. My mom doesn't know when. My grandmother doesn't know. Like, we don't know why. And I think what my experience was for myself was, and what I've learned from talking to other women is, first of all, for me, when I went through menopause, not that I gave a whole lot of fucks before, but I really don't now. And so that can be a huge game changer, good or bad, in the workplace, especially when you're thinking about knowing it's time to go. Um, if you don't really have a lot of connection to your work, or your boss is not treating you well, and you're in the middle of perimenopause or going through the final stages of menopause, I can tell you to be prepared to be that much more quicker to be like, I am out. Like,
Okay.
let me give you my 2 weeks. I think there's also all of the things like brain fog and hot flashes and all the symptoms that we experience physically that can make it really uncomfortable to be at work, and make it also it's even more likely that you feel like you're alone and the only one going through it, especially because we don't talk about menopause. We don't talk about toxicity in the workplace. So those two things combined end up just being really, really messy. I think the other thing about menopause that can cause loss is from the whole spectrum of, if you wanted to have children and couldn't, decided not to, whatever, I think that's a big loss. I think that if you've given a lot of time to the workplace and you haven't had as much time for your family, loved ones, however you define family, that can also bring up feelings of loss. And then, like I said before, just like the fact that no one knows how to handle all of your physical symptoms in the workplace make you really feel alone, or made me feel alone. I'll put it that way. And I think can cause all sorts of emotional mess and feelings.
I can imagine that is even worse. I've had a lot of bosses that were older women. So I could see it sometimes
Mm,
sort of like understanding, even
yes.
if they didn't empathize, like
Yes.
understanding what's happening. Whereas I could see a lot of other demographics just not getting it
Not getting it. Yeah.
at all. Or
Yeah.
not, and not wanting to get it either
Well,
because
and to be
they're so
truthful, I don't think each of us, as we're going through it, get it. And so
right.
then if we don't get it and we don't know what's going on, especially brain fog is like, it's this thing that literally just kind of comes over you. And if you're in the middle of your workday or in the middle of a project and you just can't find the words you want, it makes you feel like you have lost your mind. So
Mhm.
if you don't know what's going on and then your boss doesn't know or doesn't want to, yeah, it can be really uncomfortable.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I hadn't considered. And I think for my audience, I know the age of a lot of you guys. It's something that is really crucial. So let's talk to the managers
Mm,
in the audience really quickly. When you think about the concept of leaving well, for people managers, what are three things you want them to know, consider, do,
yeah.
focus on?
So, um, let's see, just three things. I think the top three things would be, and I'll give this caveat. Not all managers are decision makers.
Okay. Right?
So I'm going to speak as though the manager has some decision making power, or at least has some decision over their team or their department. So one of the things that happens the most often when someone leaves is that someone else on the team has to take on the burden of that person's role or duties, responsibilities, unless someone else is coming in to hire right away. And even then, there's like onboarding that someone else has to take. So, cross training, although it seems really, really obvious, is something that managers can do with their teams all the time. And whether you name it as a leaving well concept or a organizational health concept, call it whatever you want, but identify in your team who has similar roles and responsibilities and could cross train with someone else's roles and responsibilities. Name it as such. Say, Rashida, you're going to cross train with Naomi so that you both know how to do each other's jobs. the unimaginable thing might happen. We just want to make sure we're ready for that. That can help later down the road when there's an exit, whether it's controlled, planned, or otherwise. I think the other thing is, this is going to sound so silly, but just start talking about the fact that people leave. Talk about, you could use examples in your sector and talk about, so-and-so, did you see that so-and-so just left and they're going on to this next job? And, how does that make us feel? How does that impact our industry? How does it impact our company? Just talking about and normalizing the fact that people leave can go a long ways in making it more of a culture, that you understand that workplace transition happens. I think a third thing that I would say is offboard your people in the way that you onboarded them. Most of us are really excited about onboarding people, and there's usually a lunch. We usually assign a work buddy sometimes. We make sure that their desk is ready and set up sometimes. I mean, sometimes onboarding is really terrible, but for the most part, we want onboarding to be exciting, and then we dismiss offboarding as though it's not a big deal at all, and we just let it happen. So planning for offboarding is really important. Whether you have a checklist to make sure, HR has a checklist, get the computer back, turn off their email, and get their badge. HR has a checklist, so why can't managers have a checklist also to make sure that the last 2 weeks of an employee's time with the organization, if it's not a termination, can be a little bit more thoughtful and planned out. Sometimes you can do little things when someone is leaving, unless it's being fired. You can, this is going to sound maybe silly, but you can decorate their workspace if you're in person with sticky notes that just say something that you really appreciate them. So having them come in the next morning, maybe it's their last day, and to a whole desk full of sticky notes that they can take with them. Maybe it's as simple as having everyone send them an email, in their last week, letting them know something that they really appreciated about working together. I think just bringing the humanity back to it. If you work remotely, on one of the last calls, have in the chat, have a waterfall where everyone types but doesn't hit send, what they'll remember most about them. And then when you say hit send, everyone's answers and responses come down in a waterfall. It can be really meaningful. And I think that anytime that you can just honor the fact that people leave and say goodbye in really intentional ways can go a long ways. I'll add a fourth thing that managers can do, and I think that is those stay interviews, especially if we're thinking about the individual not needing to hold the responsibility for them. If you have, say, your one-on-ones are once a quarter, add a second once a quarter stay interview. You can do it as a team even. I have a lot of organizations who will do it as a team, and they'll bring everyone together to review job descriptions together, and that helps everyone know not only what their other colleagues are doing, but it again helps identify gaps where other people can step in and help support. So I don't know if any of those are helpful for managers, but those would be my top.
Okay. I want to switch gears for a second and talk about the time that you spent living overseas, because you moved to Singapore and New Delhi, India, as a spouse.
Yep.
As a trailing spouse of someone who works, I'm guessing, for a corporation.
Yeah.
Who had offices in those locations. And let's talk about the kids too.
Yeah.
You have two?
We have three. We have three.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we moved to India in 2009, the kids were 3, 6, and 14. That was a tough move.
I bet.
Yeah, it was exciting. Like, I did all the things. That move was intended to be permanent. So we sold our house, we sold all our belongings. We moved some of our belongings. It was really meant to be a forever gig. And I think the hardest thing for me doing that was prioritizing the leaving before we moved to Delhi, so that I could land fully ready for India. But we did the leaving well. What we didn't do was the entry. that was my biggest learning of, especially repatriation. That was rough. But yeah.
So what about the entry made it tough?
Well, it was India. It was 2009.
Mhm.
2 years after we got there, maybe a year after we got there, the first like grocery stores started coming. So like it was early on in
Mhm.
being an expat there. I think it was tough because of the ages of our kids. It was tough because I deeply, desperately wanted community. And it was just hard and challenging to find it. It was also, I had my own loss of like not being able to work
Mhm.
and needing to find volunteerism that didn't feel patronizing or didn't feel like it wasn't aligned with going back to being aligned with my values. Um, yeah, it was tough. It ended up, I ended up, this might be going way too deep for what we want to go, but I ended up drinking a lot because like that was what we did. That was what the moms would drop off kids at school. We all had people that were hired to help in our homes, driving, cooking, cleaning. And so it was like, well, I guess we'll do that. And so that made my 3 years there challenging too.
Okay. Were you able to recognize that you were drinking more than you wanted to?
I think that I mean, I knew it
Mhm.
physically, I knew it, but there was always either someone to say, well, let's go. Like my circle of friends were all doing it also. And
Right.
so, and we also had drivers. So I was never physically needing to reconcile with the fact that I was drinking too much
Mhm.
because it never impacted, well, I say it never impacted my kids, but it didn't impact my ability to pick them up from school. They still had dinner on the table, and I mean, I quit drinking in March of 2020. So it's been not too long ago, but definitely ended up being a long-term problem that started because of that
That's
time.
it's wild because we think about like in a lot of ways moving overseas is romanticized. And I talk about living abroad a lot on this channel. I know it's a goal for a lot of the women that live here, but one of the things I also say is that when you're moving into a different culture, you may not have all of, I'm going to say, coping mechanisms
Yeah,
that the people who are already living in that culture. So, what I would probably describe it as like the actual Indian women who were of the same socioeconomic class that you were, but also had, nothing to do, who had the drivers and the help. They've probably seen a whole lifetime of women
right,
like ahead of them
right,
who learned coping mechanisms
right.
for like filling the time.
Yeah,
With you looking for community, and a lot of ways that we form community in the US is over food or drinks.
right,
It's
right.
like,
Well, the other thing too is that we were very much in the middle of the expat community. Like our daughter went to the American Embassy School. Well, our kids went to AES, American Embassy School, and our daughter went to preschool at the embassy on the embassy grounds. And so that circle of women also are used to seeing people come and go. And so they're not, I mean, they're welcoming and open armed, of course, but it wasn't, I don't know, it was just a more transient
right.
style of friendship.
Mhm.
The other thing that I realized later, I didn't realize it at the time, I was running quite a bit, and it even started a women's running club before we moved to India. Well, I couldn't because of the pollution and the rough roadways, and just because, I mean, monkeys would jump out of nowhere. I couldn't run. And so I didn't realize, like, I lost that in the move, and I didn't realize until later I was trying to replace my activity level and my all of those things. So yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying because I think in a lot of situations women can end up in the same thing where like alcohol is the thing
Yeah.
that bonds them with, you know, their community. I didn't think about it until I saw someone writing about how like the answer for mothers is always like
Mm,
just have a drink, right? Like that's like,
yep.
and I saw someone talking about how like that leads to alcoholism in mothers, and I was like, I hadn't thought about the fact that like the joke is always like just have a drink, like put the
Yep.
kids to bed and have a drink, do
Yep.
this, have a drink, and how like our our communities can sometimes be so centered around that we don't even notice it or we don't notice the way we talk about it.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing. That was really
Yeah.
thoughtful.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so 3 years later, you left what was supposed to be a forever situation.
Yes.
Can you share why?
Yes. So, I mean, I joke about this, but it also is the truth. So we uprooted our lives, went to New Delhi, India, and 2 days after my kids and I landed, my husband left for 3 weeks for work. And that started basically what was the cycle of us living there was he traveled a lot for work. And I was like, okay, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind, that
Mhm.
I would be in India basically by myself with the kids. I mean, granted, we had a whole house full of amazing humans that were helping, but he wasn't there a lot. And so that started to wear on me. We had a kid who had to leave just as he was starting high school, had to leave all of his friends, sports. And so that was challenging. We had our little one, we found out was hard of hearing, and trying to do speech
Mm.
pathology and all of those things in a country where at the time there wasn't an English speaking speech path, English as a first language. And so even trying to navigate that with her, um, there was amazing speech pathologists, but they were Hindi speaking first, English speaking second. And so that would have changed the way that she learned how to speak. So there's
Mhm.
just all sorts of things. Then kind of the last straw was that I contracted chikungunya, which is a mosquito-borne virus. So did my husband, and I spent 3 weeks in really a mess. High fever. I had no idea what was happening during those 3 weeks. It was head to toe rash all over my body. And then chikungunya is Swahili for stooped over, and so it attacks your joints.
Ooh.
It also really impacts people who have previously had mono or the Epstein-Barr virus. And so my Epstein-Barr virus woke up. And so all the doctors that I went to see said, you need to live somewhere cleaner, which wasn't the truth, but it was what the Indian doctor said. It was also common if you were not feeling well for them to tell you to put a hat on and quit drinking cold drinks. So it was just I thought it was the next in line of the recommendation. So the closest place for us to go that was quote unquote clean, that didn't impact my husband's job, was Singapore. So me and the kids moved, and my husband stayed in India.
Oh.
Yes. So that was the next iteration of this forever move.
Mhm.
We did that for a year. He would come to visit for one weekend every month. And then after a year, it was just too much. And so we ended it, quickly repatriated back to the States, and have been back. That was in 2013. So
You've been back. And you were in Florida? Where have you been?
we've been all over since we got back. We landed in Orlando, Florida when we moved back. My husband's company relocated headquarters up to Virginia. We were then in Ohio, Nebraska, back to Florida, and then we just moved pretty quickly, suddenly, outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. Um, are you in what you think is a forever
Oh my
situation now?
gosh. I mean, I would hope so. What we're doing right now is my husband's family has property outside
Mhm.
of Atlanta. And so I've always wanted to build. I grew up in the country, and I've always wanted to be back in the woods. So the idea is that we're building, truly, hopefully, the forever home out in the woods, South Fulton, Georgia. So fingers crossed.
Did the kids like Singapore more than New Delhi?
I think that the kids, when I asked them about that, my daughter has the hardest time with India because, and I think she was young, she was 3. Um, I'll tell you the story. This might help answer that question. When we first got there, I was really taken aback by the onslaught of emotions and dirt and clean and poverty and wealth. And it was just a lot. If you've ever been to India, it's just a lot. And I kept thinking, how are my kids handling this so well? I'm a mess trying to keep it all together. It's just so much. And then about 6 weeks later, our shipment arrived, and we put the kids' car seats in, the booster seats. And then all of a sudden the questions came. Mommy, why doesn't he have an arm? Mommy, why is that little girl in the middle of the road? Mommy,
Oh, they
why?
couldn't
They couldn't
see.
see. They couldn't see.
Oh.
And so that's the story I tell all the time, because I think their reaction to it, like they were going with all this hyped up, India's going to be amazing, because that's what I thought I needed to do for them, was make it amazing. And what I needed to really do was just let them experience it and see for themselves what it was going to be like. I think their experience in Singapore, they were all older. And the Singapore American school had more amenities. And so if you ask them which they liked better, they'll say Singapore, I think mostly because it was a quote unquote nicer experience. But then when we start to really story tell, all of the really deep emotional stories were from our time in India. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That's helpful. So let's talk about leaving a place well and
Yeah.
entering the next place better, right? So for people who are considering moving abroad, what are some lessons you learned from the times that you've left? And then we'll get to entry later.
Yeah. Well, if anyone's listening who has been in this situation, you'll know what I'm talking about and laugh. If you're not, then just humor me. But when you announce that you're leaving a place and you're living abroad and it's not your passport country, what often happens is people are like clamoring for your stuff. Like
Yes.
if you know, like, well, are you going to take that one chair that you have in your bedroom? Because I really like that. And you're like, I just told you I'm leaving. Like, let's have a moment of like silence for me leaving. But everyone's always like, are you taking that lamp?
Mhm.
I think the thing that I learned the most lesson was plan your own party, or plan your own whatever you want it to be, and do it in the way that you want. There's an episode with Jerry Jones on my podcast, and he says, and I've come to learn that this is really powerful, to rank your friends. He's like, you do not have time to say goodbye to everybody when you're leaving a place. So rank your friends. Like, figure out who your number one, your number two, your number three are, and prioritize them. Do not prioritize your number 20s. And I just think that's really powerful, and really, I don't know, it gives us some grace, I think, in not trying to do it all when you're also trying to pack out and move and leave. I think the other thing that I learned, this is more appropriate if you've got littles, is to just talk openly about you being sad or you being excited. Go back to the places that are your favorites. I know that sounds super cliche, but it will be really meaningful if you go back to the one place where so-and-so knew your name and knew what you wanted to order. Let them know that you're leaving and say goodbye one more time. The other thing that's super practical is when you're packing out, have a load last off first box. So put the things that you need in your next home, flashlight, charger, what do you call it when they're the ones that you can use in different, like the universal chargers.
Yes.
You know, make sure you have what you're going to need your first couple of nights in a box that you load on the truck or the shipping container or in your car last, because then when you open the thing, shipping container, truck, car, it's the first thing you bring in. So it might even be as silly as paper plates and a candle and a lighter, or matches. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Like it's practical, but it also really makes the leaving and the arriving even better.
All right. That is super practical and helpful. What are some Teresa says I live with rankings, probably because I'm an introvert. That is
So
great
people
advice.
know.
You can't. And something that I think about after I've lived in quite a few different places is that there are always a list of things that I'm like, oh, I can't. When I move here, I'm going to do this thing, and then I leave without ever having done that
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
And so that list of like whatever things, and they might be some really touristy things, whatever
Yeah,
things you want to do that you've never done, and how
absolutely.
can you make them happen in the time that you have
I love
left.
that. Yes.
And maybe it's taking your top people with you, right?
Yeah.
Like dividing
Yeah,
up that list and seeing who wants to go to this place
I
with
love
me.
that. Yeah.
Because that's the one thing that I'm always like, I always have this list of things I want to do. But
Well,
life,
especially if you're trying to live in the place, the touristy things end up being on the bottom of the list.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So what is your advice for moving into a new place?
My advice always is go find a library.
Okay.
And that's going to be different, depending where you're living, especially if it's overseas in a place that's not your passport country. But I think that the library, it's full of helpers. And so not only will you be able to get information about the place that you're living, but the librarians are always just so incredibly helpful. So the library is always my first recommendation. I always think also that it's really good to balance your excitement for new food with eating what is your staples for a while, especially if you're in a place where your stomach needs to adjust. Like, don't go crazy the first week with like eating all of the local food. Like, give yourself a minute to adjust. Maybe that's just our experience in India and Singapore, but we learned the lesson later, to give it a little bit. Although it was really fun to go check out the local markets right away. I think that's another really powerful thing to do. And then of course, like especially if you're in a place where there's a local language that's not the same as yours, I think it's respectful to learn a couple of phrases, at least so that you can communicate, at least at a basic level. I think the other thing that I would say is going back to what you said, Rashida, about having a list of things that you want to do. Prioritize them, like put them on your calendar, so that you don't find yourself in week 2 still sitting in your new flat, counting off days and not getting to do the things that you were excited to do when you first got there. What about you? What would you say?
So I would say, when entering a place, I think let it be known somehow that you are open to community and meeting new people.
Yes.
I would say don't place too much of an emphasis on the community you meet right away, because not everybody's going to be your friend,
Yeah.
right? And I know that some people get really turned off of a place if they don't like the people they meet right away. Your people are probably there. They may just be harder to find.
Yeah.
So I think Facebook groups are a great place to do that. Tell people like, hey, I'm here.
Yep.
I'd like to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes in some places, it also requires I'm going to do X at Y, right? At this time,
Yep.
anyone wants to join me,
Yes.
message me, meet me there,
Yes.
whatever. Because it's really hard in a lot of places where you live. I'm going to guess the community you walked into in New Delhi was just like this. There are always people coming and going. So when the new person shows up and is like, hi, I'm here, they may not necessarily get like 1,000 people reaching out their hands to
Right.
like time with them, because it
Yes.
happens every day, right?
Yes.
There's a new person all the time.
Yes.
Um,
I love that whole, this is what I'm going to do, where and when, especially if you have something on your list, like I'm going to
yes.
go do a photo walk. Yes. I think
Yeah.
the other thing I would say is challenge yourself to repeat something.
Mhm.
Like you said, don't take it like the first experience with someone as the only experience. I think the things that have been the most meaningful to us is going back to that whole restaurant thing. When you walk into a restaurant or a bar or a cafe and they know you and they,
Mhm.
say, do you want your regular? That helps you really ground in place. So,
Yeah.
but that means you have to go there repeatedly. You have to say, my name's Naomi, I'm new here, and I would like a whatever. They'll remember that. And then that also super helps you be connected.
At the place I eat after I land, if I'm away from town, when I get back to Mexico City, I eat at the same place every time if they're open. If they're not open the day I get there, I'm going the next
Yeah.
day. And the last time, it had been 2 months since I was there, and they know multiple people know my name, right? They know my order.
Yes.
I'm a gluten-free girly, so I don't want the bread, sin pan. And I'm like, yeah, like they know, like multiple people in the place know all those things. And while they're not friends, right? Like I don't see them outside of their workplace, so I don't consider them friends, but we're friendly, and I like
Yeah.
that. I paused because I remembering a time that someone called me his friend, and I was like, no, at work. No, I have never seen you outside of
Yes.
work. We are coworkers. We are very friendly coworkers. But right, we've never had a meal outside of the work hours, we're not. I don't think we're friends. That's
Yeah.
how I like. And so yes, I was thinking about people. I was going to call them friends. I'm like, I don't see them outside of their job. Perhaps I'm just a customer that they like. So having those places that you can go to where somebody knows your name,
Yeah.
really important. I would say that when touching down as well, give yourself grace to mess up.
Yeah.
You're gonna overpay for something, you're gonna get ripped off somehow, you're gonna pay for something 3 times. You're not gonna know that you got to be home to receive
Right.
XYZ. You need to do the When I moved into my building, no one told me that I had to have a home phone in order to get anything delivered to me.
Oh, because they would call when they got there.
Yeah, they would call, and so they have to call, security calls up. And at first, and it wasn't until I don't know how we had it working the first 2 weeks, but it wasn't until security was like, "No, if we can't call up, she doesn't get it." And then I was like, "What? Wait. Oh, there's a process I don't know because no one, even the
No one told you.
no one told me. No one told me, right? Um, and that's not something I would know, right?
And it's not something you would think to ask.
But delivery man has an app on the phone, right? So I'm yes, send it, but security needs to know I'm there and that
Right.
I approve this vendor coming into the building. Oh, okay. All right, I did not know that. So that kind of thing, like
Yeah.
give yourself space to not know
Yeah.
everything and to know that your life, it's okay if your life, you have to spend some money to learn some lessons, right?
And or time or both.
Yes, or both.
Yes.
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 Yes,
Yep.
it's really interesting to have that experience of being new to a place, but because you're not new to life, expecting things to go your way.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
I
of
think
course I can live here, it's fine.
there's also something to be said. I'll share my example or my experience when we moved back to South Florida most recently. We were coming off of quite a bit of trauma with our family. I had also run for a political seat. I didn't win. And I had also launched a huge project that was really taxing. And so when we moved to South Florida, I needed to find place and my connection to where we moved, but I did not want community in people. And I think that's
Okay.
also something that is worth just knowing about yourself. Like, do you actually want the human connection? Because I don't think we all do or all need it. And it also depends on where you are in your life. So I spent the last 2 years in South Florida. I didn't know a single soul. Um, but I found my favorite coffee shops. Going back to, like you said, these people became friendly to me. They knew my name. They knew a little bit about me, but they weren't friends because I would go to their coffee shops all the time, or I would go co-work, and do some work in someone's office or what have you. But I think that's just worth bringing up too, that when you're in a new place, just identify for yourself, do you actually want community that comes with human folks? Or do you want to go volunteer and have your sense of community there? Or do you just need for a while a sense of place with the geography, the city or the location that you're in?
Okay, I have never heard anyone say this before, so I wanna dig in a little deeper. How did you know that you did not want community in that typical sense?
I don't think I could have articulated it then. I was just burnout. I was
Mhm.
burnout from people. Like, I couldn't, where we moved from, it was a small enough community and I had been very public facing that I wanted to be able to go to a grocery store and not have someone talk to me
Mm,
about my work or about the run or about whatever. Um, and so I knew that I needed to almost be a hermit a little bit. Um, I also knew that when I wasn't clamoring to find the meetups. I wasn't like searching for, I didn't want to find a Facebook group. I wanted to know that I was safe in my home. I wanted to be able to go walk and explore nature. Um, so I think it just was a figuring out. I don't think I
mhm.
knew it right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you, now that you're outside of Atlanta and you're living out in the country a little bit, are you feeling more like community now? Like you're more open to it now?
So I think I am. I
Mhm,
went to an event on Friday night, like in
mhm.
Atlanta, and I was like, okay, this will
Mm.
be my testing ground to see.
Okay.
And what was interesting was that it was a bunch of women. I don't know if you know who Robert Hartwell is. He bought a home. Um, I don't know where, somewhere. He's a black man, a black gay
Oh,
man.
no, I know who he is.
Yes.
Sir Robert. I
Sir
just
Robert.
did.
Yes.
Yes.
So Sir Robert was in town
Hmm.
hosting a screening of his show on HBO. And Glow Atanmo was flying in to be their friends. Anyway, so I went to this. It's a private little theater. I bet there was probably 50 women there, a couple of guys. And it felt amazing to be in space. And as I talked to the woman on my left and the woman on my right, we just talked. We didn't exchange phone numbers. It wasn't like we should get together after this. It was just that night, it was community. And I think that's what I'm probably most interested in. It's also probably part of being through menopause. My youngest is going to college this summer. So I'm also, I think, ready to just have some time for myself. So I don't know. You'll have to ask me again in a year or two.
Okay. All right. But I did see online that you were going to that event. I love that you had a little testing ground to see what you like.
Yeah.
Good.
And it was warm, and it felt real. Like, it felt like those were the people I'd want to be with if I was going to. I'm also, for the first time in a long time, able to get back to my, I love gardening. I love being super out in the nature and woods. So I'm like, where's that community? So if I find that group of people, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears because Nichelle mentioned that she took your quiz, the Workplace Transitions Archetype Quiz, NaomiHattaway.com/quiz. And I want to talk about, you mentioned earlier, the 4 archetypes.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what those are, what that means, etc.?
Yes. So if you're familiar with the DISC profile, DISC is pretty common, I think, in the workplace. It's an assessment that not only helps you get awareness for your own self and how you are in the workplace, but also is really, really helpful for teams. So I took the DISC profile and really explored and researched there's 4, D, I, S, and C, and created my quiz and the archetypes loosely based on DISC. So transition trailblazer, change champion, steadfast stabilizer, and change custodian are the 4. And basically the difference between the 4 of them is that it's how you might react to change. And I feel that change is what happens to all of us, and transition is how we each move through it. So you and I, Rashida, might have the exact same change happen to us, but based on who we are, we're going to react differently, and our transition journey will be different. So someone who might be a steadfast stabilizer is going to be way conscientious and very focused on making sure that the boat's not rocked. And so they're really great humans to lean on when everything else feels chaotic and traumatizing and hellacious. They're the ones that can help just make sure that everyone gets through it okay. If you're a steadfast stabilizer, though, it can be frustrating because everyone leans on you for that. So there's sometimes a really good pivot if you know someone who is maybe a change champion, because they're the ones that can help you with the balance of change can be good, and they can help you bring in what's good about this moment. Transition trailblazers are usually the people that are ready for change before it even happens. They're the people that are they launch themselves through the open door of change. What's frustrating for a transition trailblazer or someone that's working with them is they might not realize that it's hard, that there's grief, that there's loss, that there's stress. So I think that the thing about the archetypes that's the most helpful for people who take it is, one, to not feel like you're the only one that feels that way, to know that there's other people who have that same reaction to change. And it's really helpful if you can have someone else take it, who's a colleague, or if you're a decision maker, if you're a manager, have your whole team take it, because then on a grid, you can really see who you can lean on for different things. So I'd be curious, the person who said that they took it, which one they are.
Okay, so Aileen is a change custodian and strategist, and Nichelle, if you guys have taken the quiz, which I will drop again because I can do 2 things at once. Okay. I'm going to drop this quiz in the chat. It's NaomiHattaway.com/quiz. boom, boom, dropping it there. And then Nichelle, who I saw earlier, I think I've lost it. Boo, hiss, doing too many things at once. I can't remember what she said. Okay,
That's
but
okay.
yes, take the quiz. Let us know what you are. Because it's such a, we often don't think about how we respond to change, right? We just respond.
Right. Well, and the thing about, so when you take the quiz, you don't have to join my email list. Like you can say, show me my results without that. But when you get your results, then there's a whole page of like what your strengths are with that archetype, what you might be able to bring to a challenging change moment if you're that archetype. There's also a playlist if you're a music person, that's got songs special for you, and then some book recommendations as well.
Okay.
And so I think it's just really, I don't know, for people who are like quiz junkies or assessment junkies, you'll be like the first ones to take it. If you're not really a quiz person, this one, because it's based on DISC, I think is just really, I think it's really powerful. It also gives you ways to, like, for example, change champions. They're usually fast-paced and task-oriented. And so it gives you, like, if that is who you are, then keep an open mind for opportunities where you can like practice patience and empathy. Like it gives you kind of the like, what's the opposite thing that you could work on, which can help like almost develop your transition muscles, if you will.
Okay. We've got a few we've got Nichelle's a change champion and catalyst. Tracy's a steadfast stabilizer and navigator, and KB is change custodian and strategist.
Okay.
A good question from Big Sistula. I'm laughing because I forget that couples exist. Because like, why
Oh.
would you anchor yourself to another human? And I talked to, this is D. We talked about this actually a little while ago.
So funny.
So, can you speak to how couples can use this assessment?
Yeah, that is actually a great question. I think that, so for couples, it's the same as if you were a team. Knowing and kind of mapping it out. Also, if you have kids in the house, it can be really helpful to have them take it, although they might need to be a little older to understand the questions. But what I would recommend, especially if you're assuming you're different archetypes, is to look at how you can support each other and almost how you can function as like a link or two links together. So if one of you is more resistant to change and one of you is more like, bring on all the change, this can help you just name the fact that you're just different. And so it can, I think, minimize conflict. It can open up lines of communication. It also honestly gives you something that like just names the damn thing. So like if, for example, if Big Sis Doula is maybe, I don't know if you've taken it, let's just say you're a steadfast stabilizer and your partner is a transition trailblazer. You'll then be able to say, well, yeah, that's because you launch yourself into change. I need a minute. Like I need more time. You don't have to say, because I'm a steadfast stabilizer. Like you don't have to go that far. But I think that couples can use the assessment tool, partners that are working on a project together. It just helps you name how you're different when it comes to change.
Okay, that's helpful. But speaking of being partnered, and we talked about leaving, totally deep in your business. But how did you manage to not leave when you saw him like 1 weekend a month?
Oh my
When you
gosh.
got to India, which had to be a very traumatic move with 3 children, and he was gone for 3 weeks. Like, I guess we talk about staying.
Yeah, it's actually about staying. So we talk all the time about this. So we have lived the majority of our marriage. This July 26th is going to be 21 years of marriage.
Okay.
It's also helpful to know that I'm wife number 4 of
Ah,
his, and
okay.
he is my first husband, although our oldest child is not his. So we have kind of an interesting, he doesn't have other kids. I think that our marriage has worked really well because we have lived more than 50% of our 21 years in different houses.
Oh,
Not partnered, not it's not like an open marriage.
yes.
Like there's no one else, but we're just in different houses. And part of that is because as he would leave for either a headquarters shift or a new job, I would stay behind with the kids until they wrapped up a school year or until I wrapped up my project. And so he would be maybe 3 to 6 months in a place before we would join him. As the kids got older and as I got more anchored in what I wanted to do and didn't just follow him, he would go on and we would not join him. And so that's been the last decade or so. It's been me choosing to stay in a place. He goes off and then it's his responsibility to come home. And that's where we currently are too. Like as we're building this house, he lives in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's where he works. And so I think that, the big test for us is going to be as he retires. Like, the test has not been the 21 years of marriage for us doing this weird multi-home marriage. It's going to be when we're actually together in the same place. But there were times, Rashida, I mean, there were times, especially in India, where I had bags packed. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is not what it was cracked up to be, especially when you think about living outside of your passport country. I mean, there was dangerous shit that happened and I was by myself. There was one experience with really, really terrible earthquakes, and the buildings there that we were living in anyway were not built for earthquakes, and it was terrifying. And he was off, working and what I thought was having a glamorous life. Now I know, because I commute for work, that it's not super glamorous. But at the time with 3 kids at home, I thought that he was getting the best end of the deal. So yeah, it's definitely been a journey of the power of staying.
Okay. Are there lessons that you can share with us from that time?
About staying?
I guess my question is how do we, this applies to I guess all the things. One of my weaknesses is I don't think I have a good sense of the stay versus I stay way too long, right? I stay which is also I think why I'm hesitant to enter a lot of things, because I know I'm going to stay when it's really shitty for me, and when there's we've passed all hope of fixing.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to fix because I'm in it. I'm in it. Let's fix it. What are some ways we know as we march through life that whatever the situation we're in, it's time to leave? Have you, between work and life and all of your other things, are there signs? Let's talk about internal signs.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to judge that.
So I think that I would say, so we're different in that way. I am always quick to leave. I'm so quick to bounce. I think that what I would say is that, especially women, I don't know how many of your viewers in your community are not women, but women have been blessed and gifted with our intuition and our gut. But I think where we can sometimes go wrong, I'll speak for myself, where I have gone wrong in the past is that I haven't fueled my gut. So, if you think about yogurt and bacteria and literally our stomachs, we have to give it the good bacteria for it to be able to function the way it needs to. And I think it's the same with our intuition. If we're not surrounded by community who truly loves us, knows us, and can help us be accountable, whether that's friends, aunties, partner, what have you, if we don't have that, and if we also aren't super connected to our values, whenever I stray from my values, that's when I can't trust myself. So I think that internally, I know it's time to go when I've done what I can. I don't say everything I can. I don't want to say we have to stick it out and keep pushing. But when I know that I've given enough of my all to a project or a place, and when I've been still long enough to actually let my intuition speak, I think I tend to be so damn busy all the time, and I fill. So that's what this last 2 years has been for me, and part of that has been not having community input, to just be still for a couple of years. And I mean, that was a long time. You might not want to sit still for 2 years, but when we're still and quiet and we have been fueling our intuition, I think then we can trust our guts. I don't know. Does that sound really wishy-washy?
No, it sounds good in the sense that I think a lot of us are disconnected from our intuition, right? There's rarely space in this world to sit still and to sit in silence and to kind of hear the messages that are coming at you.
Yeah.
So I think it is important. It's an important reminder that, there's a lot of value there and we should be tapping into that.
Yeah. I think also, I mean, this is, a sign of our time, but like for me, changing my relationship with social media and who I follow, it
Mhm.
can be also for a time. Silence from social media, I think, is a huge part of reconnecting with our intuition. And what our gut wants and what our body needs is when we're not constantly consuming someone else's life or someone
Mhm.
else's decisions. It's hard to do that, I know, but even if you just choose one of the platforms that you're on and either mute folks or delete the app for a while so that you can just listen to your own self. There's a thing I posted recently about like create before you consume. And I
Mhm.
think that applies to like making decisions, listen to yourself first before you ask others.
All right. That's very helpful. I want to head back to the comments for a second because what I'm seeing is that a very, very good chunk, I'm going to say over 50% of the people here are steadfast stabilizer and navigator.
Okay.
Is that to
Okay.
be expected?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily to be expected.
Okay.
What I think is interesting, so I'm going to pull it up really quickly so I can just not try and speak from my memory. What I think is interesting about steadfast stabilizer is that um, steadfast stabilizers are patient and prefer stable environments. The other thing I think about you folks are that you are cautious and really value consistency. And what's really important is that you approach transitions with caretaking. So that's probably to be expected from a community of women, for sure, that's a main tenet of who they are. But I think where a steadfast stabilizer and navigator can kind of flip the script or start to like exercise the muscle of transition is to usually steadfast stabilizers have really good intuition around connecting patterns, and also being able to bring support and appreciation to the spaces that you're in. So the encouragement would be to take some of your opportunities to lean into discomfort around change. Also, not letting your change and transition or your decisions feel like you're letting anyone down. I think the other really important thing to say is that women who are steadfast stabilizers often put other people's needs above their own. And so it's very important that you start to prioritize your own accommodation needs, whether that is physical accommodation, mental, financial, space, quiet, all those things. So those are some things I would say to the steadfast
Okay.
stabilizers.
Thank you. Okay. Before we wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about back to the work that you do. So you do like project-based work. You're a consultant
Yep.
for organizations. And what do you do when you're consulting for these organizations?
Yeah. So I typically come in for one of three reasons. One, I'm either serving as interim executive director
Mhm.
or CEO for a nonprofit who has a gap, either because someone has passed away, retired, been fired, or has left. So that's one of the things I do. Another thing I do is proactive leaving well work, where someone might have a 12-year runway, or they might not have anything that they're going through a change right now, but they want to build in stay interviews. They want to build in succession planning. Sabbaticals is a huge thing that we're talking about right now. How do we put a line item on our budget for sabbaticals for our leaders? And how can we also trickle that down to program staff, frontline staff, customer service, like all the levels. And then the third place that I typically work with organizations on is when someone has identified that they're leaving, and they have 3 to 6 months. I help them navigate through the departure of the outgoing person and help them with the overlap of the new person coming in, so that there's as little disruption as possible.
Okay. Now, you also do work for your own business with individuals. So
Yes.
talk about a little bit of the individual work that you do. How do you help individuals?
Yeah. So it's important to share, and this is something I've realized in the last 6 months or so, that I am the best when I work with individuals who have already made their decision to leave the workplace. I'm not the best person for someone to come to when they're like, I think that it's time and I don't know when, and I don't know what I would do. I've got other people I'd recommend for that. But I work really, really well with individuals who are like, I know I'm leaving. You don't have to know where you're going, but you know the timeline. And then typically what we do is go through a lot of work on your own emotions and feelings about it. We navigate through your relationship to work, good, bad, or ugly. And then a big chunk of what we do is then how do you want to leave regarding your legacy? Like, is there a project that you want to wrap up? How can we get you to get that wrapped up? Sometimes individuals come to me and they haven't told their team yet. And so we can work kind of undercover, so to speak, to get some of those things going. And other times the team does know they're leaving. And so then we also work on some communication, and because that's another piece that we don't do well as organizations or as individuals, is the communication of our leaving. So
Okay.
that's a high level summary.
That's a high level summary. And if someone is watching this who wants to work with you further, what do you recommend they do?
So the first thing is take the quiz, because that will be the first thing I ask my clients is, which one are you? So naomihattaway.com/quiz. And then also on my website, there's a contact form that you can fill out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what haven't we talked about that we should talk about?
Oh my gosh, we talked about so many good things. I think the thing that I would reiterate is that change is always happening. Like, we can't control change. The only thing that we can control is how we react to it. And there's also lessons even when we don't react well. Like, it's asking a lot of ourselves to like be perfect when we think about how we navigate transition. So I think the more we can just, number one, name that change is out of our control. Number two, name that transition is what we have some control over. And then also just the more of us that we can start normalizing, I guess, that people leave and that it's common, I think the better we'll all start to get at it.
Okay. Thank you for joining me today, Naomi.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really glad we did this. It was so helpful. I'm going to drop her LinkedIn and her Instagram in the chat right now. If you want to connect, those are all just one big run-on sentence. Ignore that. Just copy one you want and use that. You know what to do. Type it in. Naomi Hattaway at everywhere, right?
Yes. Rashida, thank you so much.
Thank you. I think this was such an important conversation that we don't have often enough. So thank you for being here. The audience enjoyed, the ladies of The View, the ladies really enjoyed this conversation. So I'm so glad. If you're in my YouTube membership, we're meeting after this in about on the hour, whatever hour it is for you, for our YouTube, for our Zoom meetup. The link is in the community. Everyone else, thank you for being here. Naomi, I feel like you should end this with some of your angelic wisdom.
My angelic wisdom. Mm-hmm. I think that each of us have more power, more decision-making power than we give ourselves credit for. And I would encourage everyone who's watching to explore what one decision you can make that can help you move you closer to whatever goal it is that you want for you and your life.